It was a Tuesday when everything fell apart. That's how life works sometimes, right? Just another normal day, everything's fine. And then suddenly, you're standing in the middle of a storm, wondering how you got there. I was at my desk, sipping coffee, trying to figure out how to keep the business running while juggling a million things in my head. A few emails, a couple of phone calls. Nothing unusual. Then, the door opened. And she walked in. Now, I've always been a little paranoid about people in my line of work. I guess it comes with the territory. I'm not exactly the kind of guy who gets a lot of friendly visits. But this felt different from the usual types of problems I dealt with. She wasn't some frantic husband asking for help to find his runaway wife or a scorned lover looking for proof of infidelity. No. She was here for something else entirely. Her name was Evelyn. Evelyn Klein. Tall, blonde, and sharp as a tack. But there was something about her that I couldn't quite put my finger on. Maybe it was the way she carried herself, like she had a secret and was just waiting for the right moment to let it slip. Or maybe it was the look in her eyes. There was something wild about her, a kind of rage simmering just below the surface. I offered her a seat, but she didn't take it. Instead, she just stood there, her fingers tapping against her purse, like she was trying to control herself. I knew I had to hear her out. You don't make it in my business without learning how to listen closely to people's intentions. So I let her talk. At first, it seemed like a pretty standard request. She was looking for help with a husband who was hiding something from her. But as she went on, I started picking up on the details she was leaving out. The more she spoke, the more I realized I wasn't dealing with some poor wife trying to catch her husband in a little affair. No, this was different. Evelyn wasn't some helpless woman in a bad marriage. She was already past the point of trying to fix things. She was looking for something else. Something far darker. I need you to find my husband, she said. And I need you to do more than just track him down. I need him to understand what he's done. Now, I wasn't sure where this was going, but it sounded like it was going to be trouble. What exactly did he do? She took a breath, and I could tell she wasn't just hurt. She was furious. He's been lying to me for years. Using me. Playing me for a fool. And I've finally had enough. I need him to feel every bit of what he's done to me, and to the people he's hurt along the way. I didn't ask for the details right then. I didn't need to. But I could see the pain in her eyes, and I could hear the venom in her voice. Whatever her husband had done, it was bad. Real bad. And if she was asking for my help, she wasn't asking for justice. She was asking for vengeance. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just a job for Evelyn. This was personal. She wasn't here for closure. She was here because she needed him to pay. She needed him to suffer. I'd seen it before, sure. People in my line of work don't come looking for answers. They come looking for a way to make the pain stop. Sometimes that means breaking something. And that's exactly what she wanted. I could tell she wasn't going to walk out of that door without getting what she came for. And I'd made up my mind, this wasn't going to be a simple case. This was going to get ugly. All right, I said, leaning forward in my chair. I'll help you. But we're not just getting answers. We're doing this your way. She nodded, and for the first time since she walked in, a flicker of satisfaction crossed her face. It was like she knew something I didn't. Like the storm inside her had just gathered a little more strength. And that was when the real trouble began. I spent the next couple of days digging into Alan Klein. It wasn't exactly easy. Guy was a ghost. Good at covering his tracks. Had people who helped him stay under the radar. I figured he was a businessman, probably one of those smooth talkers with a portfolio and a bunch of useless degrees. But there was something off about him. Something that didn't sit right from the moment Evelyn started talking about him. Her anger was so raw, it practically oozed out of her. She was done with the nice guy version of Alan she used to love. The guy who brought her flowers and took her on weekend trips. What she wanted now was a reckoning. And from the way she described him, I knew he had it coming. Alan Klein wasn't some innocent fool who'd been trapped in a marriage he didn't want. No, he'd been playing a game. A dirty game. And from what I could gather, Evelyn had only started to scratch the surface. I made a few calls, started poking around. It wasn't long before I stumbled across the first piece of the puzzle. Alan's business wasn't just a legit operation. No, it had some very shady dealings happening under the table. Money laundering, kickbacks, the whole 9 yards. Evelyn had no idea. She was still thinking he was just some high-powered executive with a few too many late nights at the office. What she didn't know was that her husband was a kingpin in a much darker world than she could have ever imagined. The more I dug, the more I realized this wasn't just a case of an affair or emotional betrayal. Alan had been running an underground network of shady business partners, and worse, he was involved in some seriously dangerous stuff. People were getting hurt because of him. People that were tied to his dirty little secrets. Some of these people were in prison, others were just gone, vanished without a trace. I didn't tell Evelyn everything right away. Some things, she didn't need to know just yet. But I did share enough to show her the extent of Alan's lies. She was furious, of course, but I could see that the pieces were starting to fall into place for her. She wasn't just angry anymore. She was determined. The kind of determination you only see in someone who's ready to go to war. One evening, after I'd gotten my hands on some solid intel, I called her up. Told her I needed to meet in person. She showed up at my office, looking like she hadn't slept in days. Her eyes were red, and she had that look again, the one that said she was running on pure adrenaline. "So what's the plan?" she asked, sitting down without even bothering to ask for permission. She was all business now. No small talk. "Alan's been hiding a lot," I said, pulling out the file I'd put together. "He's not just some businessman. He's got a whole operation running under the radar. People you wouldn't want to mess with are involved." She didn't blink, didn't flinch. If anything, she seemed almost relieved, like hearing the worst part made it real for her. "I don't care about his business," she said flatly. "I care about what he's done to me, to us, and I want him to understand the consequences of his actions." I nodded. I knew she wasn't done yet. There was more to this than just infidelity and betrayal. This wasn't about catching Alan in a lie or confronting him over a few secrets. This was bigger. The more I learned, the more I realized she was looking for something else entirely. Something deeper. "I've got a location," I said. "Alan's been meeting with some of his partners at a warehouse on the edge of town. Looks like it's where he's been running some of his more personal business." Evelyn's eyes narrowed, and she leaned forward, her voice dropping to a low growl. "Then we go there. Now." I could tell she wasn't joking. This wasn't just about exposing Alan anymore. This was about making sure he never hurt anyone again. It was about making him feel everything he'd put her through. I could have told her no. I could have backed out, let her cool off. But the look on her face told me this wasn't something I could walk away from. She had crossed a line, and now there was no going back. I made a few calls, told my team to get ready. I wasn't sure what kind of hell we were about to unleash, but I knew one thing for sure. This was going to be a night neither Alan nor anyone around him would ever forget. We didn't waste any time. When Evelyn's eyes locked on mine and she told me to move, I didn't hesitate. We were both well past the point of talking or planning. This had turned into something else. Something personal. And the look on her face told me she wasn't about to turn back. We got to the warehouse just as the sun was starting to dip below the horizon. I'd been to this part of town before. Sketchy, run down. Not the kind of place you want to be caught dead in after dark. The building itself was old, abandoned, the kind of place that used to be a factory but now just stood as a shell of its former self. Perfect for the kind of shady business Alan was running. I pulled up and parked a block away, far enough to not draw attention but close enough to move quickly. I didn't want to take any chances. I had a team with me, 2 guys who were solid in situations like this. Quiet, fast, and not afraid to get their hands dirty if it came to that. But I knew this wasn't going to be a simple in and out. Alan wasn't some amateur. If he was in there, he'd have backup. So I had to plan for everything. Evelyn didn't say much. She was in the passenger seat, hands clenched in her lap, eyes staring out the window. I could feel the tension in her, but there was something else too, excitement. Not the kind of excitement you get when you're about to score tickets to a concert. No, this was a darker kind of anticipation. like a person waiting to finally be rid of a weight they'd carried far too long. We approached the warehouse from the back, staying low, moving quickly. I'd already gotten eyes on the place earlier in the day, so I knew the layout. It wasn't huge, but it was big enough to hide things. I wasn't sure what exactly was going down in there, but I didn't need to know. All I needed to do was get Alan in a position where he couldn't escape. We cut the power to the place, flipped the breakers, and waited. The entire area went pitch black, except for the faint light spilling out of a few cracks in the building. I could hear the low hum of the generator Alan had running in the back, probably to keep the place operational while he did whatever he did in there. Evelyn didn't ask any questions. She just followed my lead. When I gave the signal, my guys moved in, flanking the entrance, making sure there were no loose ends. We didn't need to rush. We didn't need to make a sound. We just needed to wait for Alan and his crew to walk right into the trap. I knew it wouldn't take long. Alan was too predictable. He'd made deals with the wrong people, and he couldn't hide forever. The man had gotten too cocky, thinking he was untouchable. And that was his mistake. When Alan finally walked through the door, flanked by two of his goons, he was as calm as ever. It's like he didn't even notice the darkness. Maybe he thought it was just a power outage. Maybe he was too wrapped up in his own little world to realize he was about to lose everything. But the second he stepped inside, we moved in. Quick. Silent. We had him surrounded before he could even process what was happening. He froze, his eyes darting around, and for the first time, I saw the fear in them. This wasn't the cocky bastard who thought he could run a shady empire with no consequences. No, this was a man who was realizing just how much trouble he was in. What the hell is this? Alan's voice cracked. His usual smooth tone was gone, replaced by something raw, desperate. I stepped out from the shadows, right in front of him. You're not getting away this time, Alan. He tried to make a run for it, but I wasn't having it. I shoved him back, hard enough to knock him against the wall. His goons didn't move. They were frozen, trying to process what was happening. I wasn't worried about them. They were just hired muscle, the kind that thought they could intimidate people without ever actually fighting. Where's the money? I asked, my voice cold. Where's the rest of it? Alan blinked, confused. What are you talking about? I don't know what you're... Before he could finish, Evelyn stepped forward. She didn't say a word. She just looked at him like she had all the answers, like she knew exactly who he was and exactly what he'd done. And maybe she did. I wasn't sure if Alan realized it yet, but she wasn't here for a simple confrontation. She grabbed him by the collar and slammed him into the wall, hard enough to rattle the whole building. Don't lie to me, Alan, she spat, her voice low and venomous. I know everything. You think you can just walk away from this? From what you did to me? From what you did to everyone else? Alan's face went pale. He tried to shove her away, but Evelyn wasn't backing down. You used me. You used me for everything I was worth. You took everything from me, and now you're going to pay for it. You hear me? I stayed in the background, watching. The way she was looking at him, it wasn't just anger anymore. It was something darker, something more dangerous. Alan tried to speak again, but his words came out in a panicked jumble. I didn't mean to, Evelyn, please. You don't know what you're... But he didn't get to finish. Evelyn turned to me, eyes burning with that cold, satisfied rage. It's time. He's done. And that was it. The moment Alan realized it was over. He wasn't going to get out of this. Not this time. The room felt smaller, the air thicker. Alan's panicked breaths were the only sound besides the pounding of my heart, which I could have sworn was the loudest thing in that room. The kind of silence that hangs heavy before a storm. And let me tell you, this wasn't a light drizzle. This was the kind of storm that wiped everything out. Alan had no clue what was coming. I'm sure he thought his money and connections could buy him another way out. But he was wrong. Evelyn wasn't finished. I knew that much. The fire in her eyes said it all. This wasn't just a confrontation. This wasn't just about teaching Alan a lesson. No, this was the final act of a long, twisted play, and Alan had just walked right into it. Do you know how many people you've hurt? Evelyn's voice cut through the silence like a knife. You think you can hide behind your lies and your money? You've destroyed lives, Alan. And now it's time for you to feel what it's like to be on the other side of that. Alan swallowed hard, still trying to process. But the thing was, he didn't have any answers anymore. His charm, his polished smile, none of that worked here. Not when the truth was staring him in the face. He shifted uncomfortably, trying to escape Evelyn's grip, but she just tightened her hold. She wasn't letting go. Not now. Not ever. It was clear this wasn't just about the business, or even the betrayal anymore. This was about everything he had done to her, to them. Every lie, every deceit, every empty promise. She had carried that weight for too long, and now it was his turn. I stepped in, my voice low, controlled. You still think you're getting out of here, Alan? You think you're just going to waltz back into your little world of money and power? You're not the same man you used to be. His face flushed red. His eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape. I could almost see the wheels turning in his head, weighing his options, none of which looked good. I can make it right, Alan stammered. I can fix this. You don't know what's. Don't even start, Evelyn snapped, her grip tightening again, her fingers digging into his collar. You've had plenty of chances. You've been lying to me, lying to everyone for years. And now, you're going to pay for every single thing you've done. I watched her, the way her rage built up like a slow-burning fire that finally reached a boiling point. She was no longer the same woman who walked into my office days ago. No more tears, no more heartbreak. That Evelyn was gone. This one was a force of nature. Alan's eyes widened. You can't. This is crazy. You're making a mistake. You don't know what you're doing. But Evelyn wasn't listening to him anymore. She had heard every excuse, every apology. She had been living in that echo chamber of lies for too long, and now she was done. You don't get to call the shots anymore, Alan, she said, her voice a steady, cold knife. You don't get to control anyone's life. Least of all mine. She turned to me, and for a split second, the storm in her eyes softened. Just a hint of something different. Something almost like relief. Like she was letting go of a burden she'd carried for so long. I nodded. I understood. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about putting an end to everything Alan had taken from her. I motioned to my guys, and they moved in closer. We weren't going to let him walk out of here. Not unless it was in a body bag. And even then, we'd make sure no one would ever find him. I didn't trust Alan enough to leave him breathing. He was too slippery, too dangerous. He would find a way to get back at her, back at all of us, if given the chance. Evelyn let go of him for a moment, stepping back, breathing heavily. I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her fists clenched at her sides. But her eyes were clear, focused. I'm done, she said softly, almost to herself. I'm done with you. Alan finally snapped. You think you've won, don't you? You think you can just ruin my life and walk away? You don't know who I am. But Evelyn wasn't having any of it. I know exactly who you are, Alan. And that's the problem. I thought I didn't, but I do. And now you're nothing but a coward hiding behind lies and blood money. It was like a switch flipped in her. Everything changed. The way she stood. The way she spoke. There was no more doubt in her. She wasn't afraid of him anymore. She wasn't even angry anymore. She was just finished. And that's when I knew. It was over. For Alan, for all his games. He was right about one thing though. He had no idea who he was dealing with. Because Evelyn Klein wasn't the woman who'd walked into my office just days ago, hoping for answers. She was something else entirely. Someone who had stared down the deepest part of her own darkness and come out on top. The rest of the night passed in a blur. A few more moves, a few more decisions. Alan didn't stand a chance. His empire came crashing down, and I made sure no trace of him remained. No records, no evidence, nothing. Evelyn was quiet when we were done. No words, no thank yous. She didn't need to say anything. She'd gotten what she wanted. And maybe, just maybe, she was starting to get something back she thought she had lost forever. I watched her disappear into the night. Just like that. Gone. And when she walked out, it wasn't just Alan's world that had been torn apart. It was hers too. But she was stronger now. She knew that. And me? I went back to my office. Back to my life. Ready for whatever came next. A few days passed after we handled Alan. I didn't hear from Evelyn, and honestly, I didn't expect to. People like her don't need anyone to hold their hand through their pain. They just deal with it. They carry it, wear it like armor, and keep moving forward. That's what I thought, at least. But something in me wasn't sure if that was the full story. My office stayed quiet. No calls, no frantic emails. Just the usual string of people who'd never really been to the edge of something dark enough to change them. Business as usual, or so I thought. Then, on the fourth day after everything went down, she showed up again. I didn't even have to look up to know it was her. The way the door opened, the sharp click of her heels on the tile. It was Evelyn. Same energy, same fire. But something was different this time. She wasn't angry anymore. She wasn't hurting either. She was calm, in a way I hadn't seen before. She stepped into my office, sat down across from me, and didn't say a word at first. Just looked at me like she was taking me in for the first time. Like she had something to say but wasn't sure how to start. I waited. I knew better than to rush people like her. Sometimes, silence said more than words. Finally, she broke it. "He's gone," she said, her voice low but steady. I nodded. Yeah. No trace. No loose ends. She leaned back in her chair, looking almost peaceful. The kind of peace that comes from letting go of something that's been poisoning you for years. She wasn't smiling, but there was a shift in her. A weight had lifted. Not that it made her any less dangerous, but the edge of desperation was gone. She had nothing left to prove. "Is it weird?" she asked suddenly, her gaze not meeting mine. "Not feeling anything about it anymore? Like, I thought I would. I thought I'd feel something after all this. But I don't." I didn't know how to answer that. People think revenge will give them closure, some kind of clean slate, but it rarely works that way. The anger fades, but the emptiness remains. And with it comes the realization that you're never really the same after you've gone that far. "You did what you had to do," I said carefully, trying to find the right words. "You got your justice, Evelyn. Sometimes that's all you get. It's not always going to feel like you think it will." She looked at me then, finally meeting my eyes. "I thought I'd be different, you know? That it would change me, make me whole again. But instead I just feel nothing. And I guess that's how it is. Sometimes when you fight that hard you end up empty." She was right. That's the thing about revenge. It can be like poison. It fills you up, but it doesn't heal anything. It just takes what's left and leaves you staring at the aftermath of your own rage. She took a breath, almost like she was shaking off the thoughts. "I'm done with it. With him. With all of it." Then she glanced up at me, a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. "I'm going to start over. I've got some things to figure out, but I'm done being the victim. I'm done letting people like him take everything from me." I couldn't help but respect her for that. There were plenty of people who would have crumbled after all that. Would have let the anger eat them alive. But not her. She wasn't looking for sympathy. She wasn't even looking for answers anymore. She was looking ahead. I guess that's what separates the survivors from the rest of us. "You sure you want to go it alone?" I asked, a little curious. Evelyn laughed, but it wasn't a light laugh. It was low, knowing. "I don't need anyone to fix me, Marcus. I just need to keep moving." I wasn't sure if she was talking to me or herself. Maybe both. She stood up to leave, but before she reached the door she paused. "You know, I didn't think I'd ever say this, but thanks. You didn't have to help me. But you did." I nodded. "It's what I do. You're a tough one, Evelyn. It wasn't easy, but you handled it like you've handled everything else in your life, head on." She gave me a look that was equal parts grateful and wry. "Yeah, well, you never know what you're capable of until you're pushed to the edge." I watched her walk out, the door clicking shut behind her. I'd done my job, and I'd helped her get what she wanted. But somehow, seeing her walk away felt like the end of something more. I don't know. Maybe it was just me thinking too much, but it felt like a chapter had closed. Not just for her, but for me too. The thing is, I wasn't just a guy who got paid to handle other people's messes. Somewhere in the middle of all that darkness, I'd seen something that made me wonder if I was more than just the guy with the answers. I wasn't looking to get involved, but I couldn't help but wonder if, maybe, there was a little more to all this. After she left, I sat there for a while. I had a few more calls to make, a few more cases to get through. But for once, I didn't feel like I was just cleaning up after someone else's mess. I felt like I was part of something. Like the road I'd been on had been leading to this moment. Not for vengeance, but for something else. And maybe, just maybe, that's where the real story begins. A week passed. The world outside my office continued to spin, people came and went, and the usual problems showed up on my desk. But something had changed for me. It wasn't something I could explain, not easily. It wasn't about Evelyn, though she had left a mark. It was about how the whole situation had shifted something deep in me. Maybe it was her cold fire that I couldn't shake. Or maybe it was seeing someone go through so much and not crumble under it all. Either way, I couldn't quite get back to the routine, the autopilot I used to function on. I wasn't ready to admit it to myself, but I was thinking about her more than I should have. She was strong. She was determined. But there was something about that emptiness she carried, that hollow place in her chest, that kept sticking in my mind. I couldn't figure out if it was pity or respect that I felt for her, but either way, I couldn't forget her. I had this nagging feeling that things weren't quite over. Then, on a random Thursday, the phone rang. I'd just finished a meeting with a client who was trying to track down his runaway daughter. A messy situation. As usual, the paperwork was stacked high, the deadlines were tight. But then the phone call came in. A number I didn't recognize, but the name on the screen gave me pause. Evelyn Klein. I picked up before the second ring. Marcus Flint. Hi. It was her voice. Calm, measured. Not frantic. Not angry. Just steady. It's Evelyn. I need your help again. For a split second, I almost laughed. Again. I couldn't believe it. The woman who had come to me looking for revenge, who'd walked out of here like she was ready to burn everything down, was calling me back. It felt strange. I wasn't the type to get attached to cases, much less to people. But somehow, this was different. What's going on? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. I didn't want to sound too eager, but I couldn't deny that curiosity had my attention. She hesitated. It's Alan's people. They're starting to come after me. I don't know how they found out, but they're following me, watching me, and I can't shake them. I don't know who else to trust. I felt my stomach tighten. This wasn't a phone call I expected. Alan's empire might have crumbled, but that didn't mean his connections had disappeared. And if he had any loyalists left, I knew it wouldn't be long before they started hunting down the people who put him in the ground. Where are you? I asked, standing up from my desk. My body was already in motion before my brain even processed the words. I'd been waiting for something like this. Waiting for the fallout. Downtown, she replied quickly. I'm at a small cafe, on the corner of 5th and Park. It's not far from your office. You can find me there. I didn't waste any time. I grabbed my jacket, said goodbye to the paperwork, and headed out. The drive was short, just enough time for me to think about how quickly things could go sideways. Evelyn had made a decision, but the consequences weren't going to be easy. She'd set the pieces in motion when she decided to take Alan down, but now the game was real. And there were no more safe plays. When I got to the cafe, I spotted her right away. She was sitting at a corner booth, the same spot I had seen her in before, but this time, there was a tension to her posture. She was watching the door. Her eyes were darting around, alert, like she was waiting for someone, looking for a threat. I walked over and slid into the seat across from her. She didn't say anything at first, just studied me like I was part of the scene she was playing in her head. But when her eyes met mine, I saw it. The mask she wore wasn't hiding everything. She was rattled. I didn't think they'd find me, she said quietly. But I've been looking over my shoulder for the last 2 days. And now, they're making it clear they know exactly where I am. I could tell she was trying to hold it together, trying to seem in control. But I also knew her well enough by now to see the cracks. This wasn't the same woman who walked in here looking for revenge. That woman had been prepared for a fight. This Evelyn? She was scared, and she wasn't sure what to do next. I leaned forward, keeping my voice low. You're not alone in this, Evelyn. You've got me, and I'm not letting them get to you. Not on my watch. She didn't react the way I thought she would. No thank yous, no grateful smiles. Instead, she just looked at me for a long, heavy moment, and then she nodded once, like a weight had shifted inside her. I wasn't sure what that meant, but I knew something had changed. She wasn't ready to give up, not yet. But she needed more than just protection. She needed reassurance. And I was the only one left who could give her that. I've been thinking, she said, her voice softer now, about everything that happened. About Alan. And about me. I've been hiding behind this mask of rage for so long that I forgot who I used to be. I didn't say anything. I knew the words weren't meant for me. They were meant for herself. She was trying to come to terms with the things she'd buried, with what she had done, what she'd become. I couldn't fix it, and I wasn't going to pretend I could. But I could be there at least. Her gaze hardened again, the familiar spark of defiance returning. But I won't run. I won't let them intimidate me, Marcus. I'm not backing down. I've come this far. I'm not going to stop now. I could feel the shift in the air. She wasn't just trying to convince me. She was convincing herself. Evelyn Klein was not a woman who was going to be defeated. Not now, not ever. I'll make sure you're safe, I said simply. And this time, we'll finish it. For good. And that was it. No more words needed. We both knew the stakes had just gone up. The game was on, and we weren't backing out. I stood up to leave, my hand brushing against hers for just a moment. I didn't know if she felt it the way I did, but I could have sworn there was something between us that wasn't there before. I left the cafe with my mind racing, already running through the next steps in my head. I knew Alan's people wouldn't go down without a fight. But I wasn't worried. I'd been through worse. And Evelyn, well, she wasn't about to be a victim anymore. No more hiding. Things moved fast after that. I'd like to say I had a plan, a perfect strategy for keeping Evelyn safe, but honestly, I was just winging it as I went along. She wasn't the kind of woman you could protect with a phone call or a quick fix. She had to see it for herself. She had to feel the safety, see it in every step we took. And I wasn't sure if I could pull it off. But for her, I had no choice. Over the next few days, we stayed in motion. I arranged for a few safe houses, places she could stay in case things got too hot. I made sure no one could trace us. I called in favors, moved fast, and worked quietly. Evelyn didn't ask too many questions. She was still the same focused woman, but now I saw the subtle cracks. Her mind was never fully in the present. It was always scanning, always watching the shadows, listening for the faintest sound of footsteps behind her. I couldn't blame her. I'd have been the same if I were in her shoes. But the truth was, we were always one step ahead of them. I made sure of it. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get worse. Alan's people didn't give up that easily. These weren't your typical thugs, they were professionals, and when you start cutting off the head of a snake, you know the rest of them will come looking for blood. By day 4, the phone rang again. I had just dropped Evelyn off at a new place, a quiet, secluded cabin out of town. It was supposed to be safe. The kind of place where you wouldn't even hear a car drive by. But this time, I didn't recognize the number. I picked up the phone, my stomach already tight. Marcus Flint. The voice was low, controlled, but there was an edge to it. Like a man who knew exactly how to handle situations like this. "Who is this?" I asked, my hand instinctively going to the gun I kept in my jacket. My instincts were sharper now than they had ever been. People like Alan's men didn't waste time. If they were calling, it meant they were already too close. "Doesn't matter," the voice said, and I could hear the smile in his tone. What matters is you've been playing a game you don't understand, Flint. We know who you are. We know what you've been doing. And we've got a message for you. And your little friend. My heart sank. I didn't have to ask who they meant. Evelyn. They were getting closer, and now they were making it personal. What do you want? I kept my voice steady, though I could feel the tension building in my chest. I want you to know that we know where she is, the voice said calmly, almost too calmly. And we're not going to stop until we get what's ours. So, you can keep running around playing the hero. Or you can meet us. Right where we want you. The choice is yours. And just like that, the line went dead. I didn't waste any time. I grabbed my jacket and moved quickly. My mind was already working through every possible scenario. If they had tracked Evelyn, they were already here. I knew they weren't just talking. They were coming. And when they came, they wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. I drove straight to the cabin, but something felt off. I couldn't shake the nagging feeling in my gut that I was walking straight into a trap. When I pulled up, I didn't see anything unusual at first. The cabin was isolated, like I had planned. But then I noticed it, a black SUV parked just outside the tree line, the engine still running, but no one in sight. My hand went to my sidearm without thinking. I stepped out of the car slowly, my eyes scanning the area. I had to move fast. I could already hear the crackling of leaves behind me. Someone was coming. Evelyn wasn't in the cabin. The door was slightly ajar, but the place was empty. My heart raced, and the pit in my stomach deepened. She wasn't just hiding, she was gone. And whoever had been here had taken her. I cursed under my breath and pulled out my phone, dialing her number. The phone rang 3 times before it went to voicemail. They had her. I knew it. And I knew where they'd take her next. The warehouse. It was the only place left that made sense. I wasn't sure how Alan's men had gotten to her so fast, but I didn't care. I had no choice now. This was it. The final act. I slammed the door to the cabin and made my way back to the car, racing toward the outskirts of the city. The roads blurred as I drove, my mind fixated on one thing: getting to Evelyn before they did anything else. I called in backup, but I knew the chances of getting there in time were slim. Alan's men were pros. They'd be expecting us. But I wasn't going to let them take her again. The warehouse was on the outskirts of town, hidden behind layers of old and used buildings. It wasn't the first place I would have looked, but it was the place I'd always suspected. I parked a couple of blocks away and moved in on foot. The night was dark, too quiet, and the only thing I could hear was the pounding of my own heart. I wasn't thinking about myself anymore. All that mattered was Evelyn. As I neared the entrance, I saw 2 men standing guard, their eyes scanning the perimeter. I stayed low, slipping between the shadows. My heart was pounding so loudly in my ears I could barely hear the movement around me. I had one shot at this. I reached for the handgun, slowly unsnapping the holster. As I took a breath, ready to move in and take the first guy down, I heard the unmistakable sound of a voice, Evelyn's voice. "Let me go," she screamed. I froze. She was inside. I couldn't let her voice be swallowed by the dark silence of the warehouse. Every second that passed felt like it was dragging us both closer to a nightmare. My instincts kicked in, telling me to move fast, to get in there before they could do anything to her. But I wasn't going to make a rookie mistake. I couldn't just rush in, guns blazing. Not with Evelyn's life hanging in the balance. I crouched low, scanning the area. There were 2 guards by the front door, and I could hear at least 3 more inside. That didn't include whoever was running the show, whoever was pulling the strings behind all this. Alan's men were ruthless, but they weren't stupid. This wasn't going to be easy. The voice, Evelyn's voice, cut through the air again, but this time it was quieter. Desperate. "You don't know what you're doing. Let me go. You'll regret this." I wasn't sure who she was talking to, but I could guess. They weren't treating her like some hostage. They were trying to break her. I felt my teeth grind as I moved, inching closer to the warehouse entrance, waiting for the right moment. The guards were distracted, watching the road, clearly expecting someone else. They didn't know I was already inside their perimeter. And that was their mistake. I made my move. The first guy never saw me coming. I took him out quick, silent, a single strike to the back of the head that dropped him without a sound. The second guard started to turn, but before he could even reach for his weapon, I was on him, using his momentum against him. A twist of the arm, a quick shove, and he was down. 2 guards out, but I wasn't celebrating. Not yet. I didn't have time for mistakes, not with Evelyn still inside. I moved like a shadow through the dark, crouching behind boxes, keeping my movements smooth. I didn't even bother checking the guards' weapons. I knew how to get by without them. But I needed intel. I needed to know where they had her. I found the door leading deeper into the warehouse. It was barely cracked, but I could hear muffled voices coming from inside. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open just enough to peek through. There she was. Evelyn was standing in the middle of the room, tied to a chair, her face set in that same stubborn, defiant expression. She hadn't broken. They hadn't broken her. But the man standing in front of her, the man with a gun in his hand, was trying hard. "Last chance, sweetheart," the man said, his voice smooth but cold. "Tell us where you hid the money. If you cooperate, maybe we won't make this hurt as much." I recognized him. A tall, lean guy who had worked with Alan in the past. I didn't know his name, but I knew his face. He was the kind of guy who would pull the trigger without thinking twice. But Evelyn wasn't giving him the satisfaction. She just glared at him, eyes burning with hate. "You think I'm going to tell you anything? You'll kill me, and I'll still take it to the grave. You'll get nothing from me." The man grinned. "That's the spirit. You're a tough one. But tough doesn't always win, sweetheart. Remember that." I didn't give him a chance to say anything else. I burst through the door, gun raised, my voice a sharp command. "Get away from her." The man spun around, his eyes wide with shock. He didn't expect anyone to be there. He didn't expect me. I took one step forward. "You're not going to hurt her. Not tonight. Not on my watch." He hesitated, just for a second. Long enough for me to take advantage of his mistake. He reached for his gun, but I was faster. I fired 2 shots, one to his hand, the other to his leg. He dropped to the ground with a howl of pain, clutching at his wound. Evelyn's eyes locked onto mine, her face registering something between relief and surprise. I could see the tension drain from her shoulders as she realized I wasn't here to fail her. "Marcus," she breathed. Her voice was raw, but there was that fire in it again. That fire I had seen in her when she first came to me, when she demanded revenge. It was back. She wasn't done yet. I didn't waste time. I moved toward her, cutting the ropes that bound her to the chair with a knife I pulled from my belt. Her wrists were raw, red from the tightness of the ropes, but she didn't flinch as I freed her. "You good?" I asked, keeping my eyes on the other men who were starting to stir, crawling toward their weapons. She didn't need to answer. She was already on her feet, moving like a predator again. The fire in her eyes was unmistakable. "I'm fine," she said, wiping her face with the back of her hand. "But we need to finish this." I nodded, already planning my next move. We weren't leaving this warehouse without making sure Alan's people never came back. Before we could make our next move, a familiar voice echoed from the shadows. "Not so fast, Flint." I turned, my hand instinctively going to my gun. A figure stepped out from the darkness, tall, broad-shouldered. Alan's right-hand man. I didn't know his name either, but I'd seen him in enough of Alan's meetings to know that this guy was trouble. "I think you've overstayed your welcome," he said, a smirk on his face. I didn't hesitate. I wasn't going to let him pull any more strings. I didn't care who he was. He was just another piece in the puzzle. And it was time to put an end to this. "Move," I said, my voice low. "I'm not here to talk." He didn't flinch. "Then let's see if you can make it out of here alive, Flint." And just like that, the fight began. Everything happened in a blur. I didn't have time to think. This guy, Alan's right-hand man, wasn't the type to waste words. He was all action, and that's exactly what he did. Before I could even fully raise my gun, he was moving. Fast. His hands were already reaching for his holster, pulling out his own weapon. I wasn't surprised. Guys like him always have a backup. But I didn't need to be surprised. I just needed to be quicker. The gunfire rang out in the warehouse like a thunderclap, and I was already diving behind a stack of crates before the first shot even reached my ears. My heart was racing, but my mind was sharp. I could hear Evelyn moving behind me, quick and quiet. She was ready, just like me. We weren't playing anymore. This was the endgame. I could hear him coming closer, his boots heavy on the concrete floor. He wasn't trying to be stealthy. He was trying to scare me, trying to get me to make a mistake. I wasn't falling for it. I peeked around the corner of the crate just as he did the same. We locked eyes for a second, both of us frozen in that split second before we made our next move. Then he fired again. This time, I fired back. The shots ricocheted off the walls, and the sound echoed, deafening in the warehouse. The man cursed under his breath and ducked behind a nearby stack of metal pipes. He wasn't stupid. He knew how to fight. But I wasn't just any target. I'd been in enough firefights to know when to move, when to stay low, when to strike. And I wasn't about to let some hired muscle take me down. I took a deep breath and made a decision. I had no intention of staying here for long. If I kept exchanging fire with him, we'd just end up stuck. We needed to end this, and we needed to do it now. I slid to the side, keeping low to the ground. I could hear him repositioning, trying to get a better angle on me. But I already had him figured out. He wasn't going to see me coming. I popped out from behind the crate just as he was about to peek around the corner again. He never saw it. I took 2 shots, one to his side, the other to his leg, and he crumpled to the ground, dropping his gun. He tried to move, but the pain stopped him, and he just laid there, clutching his wound. I wasn't going to waste any more time. I stepped over him, my gun still in my hand, my eyes scanning the room. The other men were still out there, but they weren't my priority anymore. Evelyn was. I found her by the back door, her face set like stone, her fists clenched. She had moved while I was distracted, and she wasn't about to let me do all the work. I couldn't help but feel a small flicker of respect for her. She'd been through hell, and yet here she was, still standing, still fighting. No matter what happened next, I knew she wasn't going to back down. "We need to move," I said, my voice low but urgent. "Now." She nodded, her eyes never leaving the man I'd just taken down. "We're not done yet. You know that, right?" I didn't answer right away. There was still one more loose end to tie up. Alan's right-hand man was out, but we weren't home free. Not yet. I could hear the sound of more footsteps. More men coming, closing in. "We're going to finish this," I said. One last time. We moved quickly, sticking to the shadows, making sure to stay low and avoid detection. I kept my gun at the ready, my instincts on full alert. We weren't out of danger yet, but at least we had a chance now. We made our way to the back of the warehouse, where I knew there was a hidden exit, a maintenance door that led into a narrow alley behind the building. It was our best shot. But as we reached the door, I heard a voice from behind us. "Not so fast." I spun around, my gun raised, and there he was. Alan. The bastard had somehow gotten out of whatever hole he was hiding in. He looked different now, rattled, desperate, like a cornered animal. But there was still a coldness in his eyes. Still that arrogance that made him think he was untouchable. "You thought you could just walk away, didn't you?" he sneered, taking a step forward. "You think you're the hero in this little story, Flint? You're not. You're just another casualty." He wasn't wrong. But I wasn't planning on being his casualty. I took a step forward, keeping my gun trained on him. "It's over, Alan. You're finished. This ends tonight." He laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "You think you can just kill me and walk away? You think this is over for me?" I didn't waste time with more words. I knew what had to happen. Alan wasn't going to stop until he was in control again. He wasn't going to stop unless someone made him. I fired. 2 shots. Sent a mass. His expression changed in an instant, his body jerking back as the impact hit. He didn't fall immediately, he staggered, trying to stay on his feet, but the fight was gone from him. His eyes went wide, and he took another step forward, right into his own grave. Evelyn moved to my side, Her eyes locked on Alan as he collapsed, hitting the cold concrete floor with a heavy thud. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. The man who had terrorized her life, the man who had manipulated and hurt her for so long, was finally gone. But even as Alan lay there, blood pooling around him, I knew this was more than just his end. It was the end of everything he'd built, his empire, his connections, his lies. And now, Evelyn was free. We were both free. I turned to her, ready to say something. Anything, but she beat me to it. "We're done," she said, her voice soft but firm. "It's over. We can go now." For the first time in a long time, I didn't have anything else to say. We'd made it through the storm. And now maybe, just maybe, it was time to find peace. We walked out of that warehouse together, leaving the past and the mess we'd cleaned up behind us. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't just a man doing a job. I was a man who had fought beside someone who understood what it meant to survive. And maybe that was enough.